So Scream, well, Scream 5. Okay, it's the fifth Scream film. And you might be asking yourself, well, why do they do that with sequels? Why do they always try to hide the number as though they're ashamed, that they're making like another entry in this saga? Why do they always got to hide the numbers? Why can't they just say Scream 5? And if you make this comment, the thing you should know about Scream is that it tries to parody its audience very very astutely, that they know you're going to make this joke. They know the comments that are going to come with this. And that's one of the elements that I've always kind of loved about Scream, but it's also been one of the most frustrating things. Like, Scream has always been not quite like a deconstruction, but more of like a love letter to slasher horror. So like basically Wes Craven kind of seemed like he was trying to like end slasher films by having a very almost kind of like postmodern take on slasher films, where teenagers would be aware of slasher films and somewhat aware that they're inside a slasher film, and yet still make all the same mistakes. Like there's something quite sobering about that, to have a film where you always there's someone who's watching a horror film who's basically going to say like, oh, I want to do that in that situation. And then of course, if you were in that situation, the terror would overtake you and you wouldn't be able to react that way, and you'd probably end up making some mistake if you're that terrified of a situation. And that much I do like about Scream. I like when it calls out stuff like that. It is though a little bit aggravating at times though when they do this. when they're trying to do like parody and kind of like tiptoe around satire, like trying to like mock slasher convention while still trying to be a slasher film. So it's trying to be a love letter, and the fifth film is very much trying to be that while also still trying to be topical. But then it kind of raises the question about like, how long can you go with that bit? Because like the way that the fifth Scream film starts off, it starts off the same way that the first Scream film started off. You know the bit. We're in Westboro, quiet suburb. Girl is home alone at night. The phone rings. She picks it up. It's a creepy guy in there who wants to play a game about horror movies. So it's basically, and pretty much throughout the film, it's mostly just repeating the same pattern of Scream, but trying to like bring in a bit more modern sensibilities to it. So like with the opening scene, the killer says that he wants to talk about horror movies, but the young person, of course, young person this day and age, is going to be more into basically highbrow horror. She lists stuff like It Follows and The Babadook, stuff that's considered a little bit more prestige horror. Not quite prestige, more like thematic horror, as opposed, basically not slasher horror, basically not slasher films. We don't have as many slasher films in the mainstream. We get a few here and there, and they kind of seem like they're making a comeback a little bit, just because horror's always been like a constant. It's just kind of like evolved over time. But basically, the killer really loves slasher movies, and he really wants them to come back. And on this level, I kind of like the direction that Scream takes, because without giving too much away here, the ultimate reveal is that toxic fandom is the real killer here. It's a bunch of like fans who don't like the way that the what do you want to say here? The in-universe movie of Stab has lost its way because it was based on the murders from like the first Scream film. So in order to get it back to what the films used to be, they basically try to stage a new like classic slasher killing so that the films can return to the way they once were. So basically, toxic fandom in a nutshell. That's a decent route to take, and hopefully I haven't spoiled too much of where the film goes in that direction. But at the same time, like, the film almost becomes like annoying with how much winking it does at that. Like, you would think that at some point in the film, I was hoping that it could take off, that it could stop just being meta and take off with its own story. Because, I mean, yeah, like, the story itself is going through, like, the same, like, the same motions as the last film. You have the central character of Sam Carpenter, played by Melissa Barrera, and she's basically the new Sydney. She's a woman who, she has a dark past. She'd rather not talk about it, but she's got to unearth her past in order to, face her demons and stop this new killer. But also we have the original Sydney. She's back as well, once again played by Nev Campbell. And I gotta say, for as much like parody as the Scream film does at horror movie tropes, it still commits to a lot of annoying ones. Like, we have a lot of characters who return here. Like, we have David Arquette show up as Dewey again. We have Courtney Cox back as Gail Weathers. She's a reporter now. Dewey has since retired as a sheriff and is now basically a drunk. But anytime we get these reveals of these characters who kind of hang back, like they're kind of in like a soft sequel type of way where they're kind of like torch passers. But anytime that they show up, they do like the typical thing they do when they want to reveal the character. They have like their backs to the camera, they push in, they turn to the camera, the music swells, and there's a hold for the applause, expecting like the fans will clap once they see Nev Campbell back on screen. And it's like, yes, they got her back for another Scream movie. Okay. And basically, like, there's a whole lot of like meta commentary on like, how fans don't like when horror franchises go in a particular direction, when they have too many new characters, not enough old characters, when they have a new plot but not a plot that's too new that it's going to scare older fans. So basically, there's this waffling Goldilocks zone that they want to find for horror films, and more importantly for this Scream film, that it becomes annoying after a while. Like, you would think by the third act they would have enough guts to just go with the slasher story and like actually make a slasher film where they're not just commenting on the third act or like getting a good kill or here's the final sequence. It's like, okay, yes, you've run through all this. We've had like, our new troop of teens, our horror victims / suspects. They've given us all the info. They've made all the commentary. They've listed off all the horror slasher rules that they went through in the first film. They do that again here, but again, like, it's just like a reiterance, and it's mostly just like more of the same, and it kind of sucks because thematically there's a lot of interesting stuff I think to explore with this Scream film, that when it's not trying too hard to be meta, it's actually pretty interesting. That by the third act, for as annoying as it tries to be with trying to like cite all these horror tropes and franchise tropes, it still manages to be like an interesting reveal. Not so much with like the characters they reveal who are the killers, but more with like the focus on like the motivations and the drive for why they're trying to kill. Like, I mean, it can honestly be anyone, and you could just attach this motivation of like toxic fandom to them, which I gotta admit is a good assembly for this type of film. And another thing I gotta give credit to is the kills. Of course, like, if you got a slasher film, you gotta have good kills. They gotta look good, and there are surprisingly a lot of great kills, even though most of the time you're just watching Ghostface, gut someone with a knife. He at least finds clever ways to do it. Like, he guts them in like the chest and the back at one point. There's one of the best kills in the film is when he stabs someone through the cheek and like slowly gets it like through the backside of the cheek there. Just great, gory, bloody stuff. That you'd want to see it in a slasher film. So in that aspect of trying to be a love letter, it still has that touch. It's just when it keeps trying to be meta, it's like, yes, I know you understand horror movies. I get it. I understand that you're trying to pay tribute to Wes Craven being knowing enough of the slasher genre. But the thing is, a lot of people are very much up on the slasher genre as well. Like, even like I gotta admit, I really love the way that they pose the teenagers in this film as being incredibly astute on both fandoms and horror movie logic, and also some of like the classic and modern horror films. Like, it was surprising to see like a slasher film with a lot of smarts with the characters. I wish I could say the same for the acting. Like, not all the actors are that great. There's a few scenes where characters are meant to just spout out meta commentary and exposition, and it just doesn't land. But to be fair, I don't think most actors could make some of these land, let alone these young actors who we got on screen here. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They are doing the best that they can with this material. Um, and I was a little bit on the fence, but I think ultimately I can give like this film a little bit of like a mild recommendation just because I do like thematically what it says by the end of the film. Annoyances and all. So like I was constantly annoyed by the film, but even with all these things working against it, as a slasher film and as a film that wants to comment on the current state of horror, it actually does a pretty good job. I just wish it could have like its cake and eat it too by also having like just a little bit of like some better dialogue, a little bit more embracing of the slasher genre that it's trying to pay tribute towards, and also just a little bit more faith in itself to have tension. Like like that's one of the things that I think the meta commentary robs. Is like when you're constantly pointing out all these horror tropes and how they fit together and how the story is going to end and where it's going to end, you're kind of removing the tension from it all. It's like, yes, we as an audience are astute enough that we see this and it's coming and we get it and I kind of appreciate the commentary on it, but you could at least have a little bit more faith to just show some tension in there, you know? So yeah, it's the Scream films are definitely showing their age, but at least they find something decent to latch on to in this fifth film. Um, and who knows, they might find something great to latch onto in the sixth film, but I don't know. It just there's only so many times that you can just point out these horror tropes and keep and keep paying tribute to them before it just becomes like an annoying roast more than anything.